think it's on. Yes, it is on. Hello everybody, Xeily here, and today I'm going to be talking about a really fun and interesting and kindergarten-friendly topic, which is objective morality in relation to secularism slash atheism and religion. Well, I guess I could be, I'll be as broad as religion on this. So, get all your 5-year-olds ready, because they're about to get really bored. So, first of all, I'm going to define what morality is exactly, because a lot of people don't really know. And, before the first, I'm going to talk about why I'm making this video. Because I hear a lot of atheists, they'll say that somehow God is evil. And, because, somehow, philosophically speaking, that's possible, which I'm not really sure how, but I don't know. So I'll define morality. And there are very different versions of this. So, for instance, I was taking some sociology classes, and the sociological version of morality is basically just whatever culture decides is good. And then there are different levels, of course. There are like taboos and mores and lower levels of morality and stuff like that. And basically, it just falls under the line of cultural relativism when it comes to this sort of thing. And I don't know, I could think of a couple theories, but ultimately, yeah, it's just cultural relativism and put in different packages and that sort of thing. And then the religious, or also the philosophical side of morality would be, at least objective morality, would be to try to find what is inherently evil and inherently good. And evil and good, they're not really terms that people use nowadays, at least in academia and in politics. But that's the goal of figuring out what morality is to define what is good and what is evil. And unfortunately, people have fallen into the trap of believing that you can have morals without having good and evil, somehow. So, I have notes this time, so I don't just rant about stuff, because I'm not very good at that, apparently. Secularism. I'll define that, because it's good to define your terms before you begin any talk, otherwise people might think that you're talking about something that you're not talking about. So secularism, I'll just define as basically non-religiousness. Anything that falls outside of the context of religion. And religion, what I mean by religion is any sort of God-based worldview. So a secular worldview I would consider would be materialism, atheism, naturalism, materialism, basically the same thing. And then all of that sort of stuff. And I don't know about Buddhism, because they sort of have a god type figure, but it's not very well defined, so I'll throw that into the religion category, though I know some atheists would take issue with that, and even some Buddhists, but I don't care, because that's how I'm defining my terms right now. So we can discuss that another time. So, here I'm going to talk about the connections between God and morality, and this is basically how it would go in a theoretical sense. But basically is this. If God exists, it's impossible for him to not be good. The only... Well, yeah, that's basically it. If he does exist, then, and he's the creator of the universe and everything else, then the universe would naturally just fall into line with God's character, which means that any morality or moral base within the universe would be based on his character. Which means what is good in the universe is good in his character, what is evil in the universe is evil in his opinion. And any actions within that this God does within the universe would then inherently just be good, because he's the definer of morality. And even if he didn't invent right and wrong, which there's, I forgot who, but there's a dilemma put forth to us by one of the old people from a long time ago. But even if he didn't invent morality, morality still has to fall in line with his character. And it's pretty simple. I mean, straightforward. So, based on that, God is unable to be evil. So, if we find suffering in the world, does that mean that God is evil because of it? No. In fact, if God, who cannot be evil, invented a creature who can be evil, and then the creature and the God have a sort of a disconnect between their moralities, naturally, and I guess just naturally, the character who can be evil would be the one at fault. So, if we are assuming that God is evil because there's suffering in the world, that actually just points to our own wickedness, our own evil, because that's, well, I mean, there are a lot of things you could say to that anyway, because much of the suffering in the world is self-inflicted as a human race. You know, wars, that's something that sort of we invented, and that sort of thing. Then you can talk about natural disasters, but if you follow the Bible, then even the Bible says that that's technically our fault as well. And it just goes under the judgment of God for a wicked population. That's not to say all natural disasters only hit wicked people, but that's to say that natural disasters in general are the result of God's sort of judgment on the world for our sake. And, you know, the Bible talks about a lot of corporate judgment anyway. So, when it comes to judgment, God doesn't, like there's a corporate level and then there's the individual level, and he judges, and he does both. On the corporate level, that tends to be like if a nation does wickedly, then he judges the nation. And then if there are good people in there, well, they will be judged on the individual level later. And of course, God will reward good people for suffering through things that, or even if they were inflicted on by God, he's going to reward the people who suffer through those judgments just because they're part of that group on an individual level later. So, that's basically it. It's impossible for God to be evil because if God created everything, then everything will, by nature, fall in line with God's character. And if there are people in that little sphere of everything that can do evil, then if there's a disconnect between God and them, then the evil person, of course, is the one who can do evil. Okay, so then, what if we got rid of God altogether? And we tried to prop up our own definitions of morality. Like, imagine God did not exist. And this is what sociologists try to do. I think psychologists, I don't know, a lot of the soft sciences try to do this. And I have my own definition for that as well. I can say it right now. Soft science, in my opinion, is something that deals more specifically with things that we can't just like pick out of the ground. You know, like psychology and sociology, they deal with the mind, and they deal with societies, which they're not like biology. You can't look at a society under a microscope and say, oh, well, that goes there and that causes that, or anything like that. There's a lot more speculation. There's the definition. There's a lot of speculation when it comes to a lot more speculation when it comes to the soft sciences. So, and that's my definition. I'm not saying that's the definition, but that's how I'm planning on using that word. So get used to it. Because according to my English background, my language background, the words only have the meanings that you carry with them. So, tough. But if we got God out of the equation, can we end up with an objective morality? And that's the problem. We can't. So, what if people are the ones who define good and evil? Okay, let's take that on the very individual level. If every single person is the definer of good and evil, then that means there's no such thing as good, right, or wrong. Because your definition is different from my definition. How do we know which one is right? They can't both be right, which means they're both wrong. Well, I mean, it doesn't go on quite like that, but there's no indicator of which one is right or wrong. Just because I don't like what you do, you don't like what I do, that doesn't mean that either one of us is wrong. There's actually, if there's no God, then it's impossible to tell on the individual level if anyone is right or wrong. Okay, what about on the more of a group level, like a societal level? What if an entire group does something that is, what if we can define morality based on what an entire group believes is moral? That also doesn't work, because then we have multiple societies. And multiple societies, they oftentimes clash on what is right and what is wrong. Like World War II is a very good example. And well, pretty much most wars, the ones that aren't based solely on territory, which a lot of them were, actually, to be honest, now that I think about it. But like the Crusades are basically on territory, and a couple later on moral basis. Either way. But then you always have at least two societies that have differences in opinions when it comes to right and wrong. Of course, there might be like trends, but not all. I mean, like you might say, all societies, they believe that we should work together at the very least, which that's pretty much the definition of a society. But does that mean that we value human life? Not all societies believe that. And what makes the majority of societies better than the minority of societies? Okay, actually that brings it to the next level. Oh, actually I'll end that level on like, I'll do that later. So what if the entire world all believed in one moral code? Then would it be acceptable to say that there was an objective moral code without God? Perhaps. Unless you factor in time. Because what if the entire world now thinks that something is wrong, however 5 minutes ago they didn't think it? Then what makes us right now as opposed to 5 minutes ago? It just doesn't work. For instance, I'll talk about racism. So what if on the individual level again, what if I believe that racists or racism is bad and another person believes that racism is good? Why am I right? Why are they wrong? It's not inherent that racism is bad unless you have a God. Okay, what if one society believes that racism is good and one believes that racism is wrong? Still, you have the same problem. What if everyone from like 300 years ago believes that racism is good? But now we believe it's wrong. What makes us more right than them? Oh, but progress. We are constantly progressing through time. And time does not make things inherently better. Or worse. Time is time. Time doesn't have a moral compass. So time doesn't teach us anything, really. What teaches us stuff? Oh, and here's another thing. If we are assuming that we are getting more moral, then that assumes that we have something to compare it to, which we don't. Unless there's a God. If there's a God, problem solved, really. So, ultimately, if everyone believed that racism is good, except for one person, who's right? Well, ultimately, you can't tell. If you are considering morality to be based on a societal or corporate level, like to be decided on the corporate level, then you have to assume that racism is good if everyone believes it is. And there's a point where pretty much most people did. Not because they were evil, just that's how they grew up. That's how they were. That's just how they saw things. Why? What makes them wrong? And that's the issue, is because without God, you have nothing to say that they were wrong, because according to their society at their time, they were right. And our society at our time, we're right, obviously. And then, again, time just doesn't make things better inherently. In fact, if you were to go back, I don't know, 1,000 years ago, you'd believe that time made things inherently worse. Because there was a time where everyone thought that there was this golden age in society that we're constantly being degraded from. Not everybody, but you know what I mean. It was the general outlook. It was the general thought. Even nowadays, not everybody thinks that progress is necessarily good. I mean, depending on how you define progress, if it's a political version, who knows? Either way. So ultimately, if you don't believe in God, there's no such thing as objective morality. You can't look back to a time in the past and say they were wrong, because according to them, they were right. It's according to us that they were wrong. And sometimes it's only according to you. Like, individually. Okay. So, I guess, in conclusion, if you come across someone saying that God is evil because he allows suffering in this world, just be nice to them, but know that the argument is terribly, terribly flawed. First of all, God can't be evil. Second of all, if there's suffering in the world, most of it's self-inflicted, because we are inherently, I wouldn't say inherently, but we have the capacity to be very evil. And then, third of all, even if there is suffering in this world, God, who is a good God, would make it right, because that's what the Bible says. So, and then eventually there's going to be no suffering in the world anyway. That's why we look forward to the Messianic era. So, there you have it. Have fun talking to your 5-year-old about this. Shabbat Shalom!